Hi, everybody. Welcome to Cultivating a Human-Centered Design Studio as part of our second annual Midwest Design Week. My name is Jacob Meisenbacher, and I volunteer as Recurring Programs Director with AIGA Northwest Arkansas, one of the 70-plus chapters of AIGA, the Professional Association for Design. This would have not been possible without the support of our sponsors this year. Thank you to Saatchi and Saatchi X, the University of Arkansas Graphic Design Program, Creatives on Call, Salesforce, Deckel and Moneypenny, and to all of our sponsors. We are grateful for your support and honored that you have entrusted us to fulfill our goals for Midwest Design Week in a meaningful way. I'd like to introduce Marty Maxwell Lane. She is a graphic designer, educator, administrator, and researcher. She is an associate professor of graphic design in the School of Art at the University of Arkansas, where she also serves as director of the school. Her book, co-authored with Rebecca Tegmeyer, Collaboration in Design Education, was published in 2020. As a longtime AIGA member, Marty has served on numerous boards, including the Director of Education for the Kansas City chapter, co-chair of the National AIGA Design Educators Steering Committee and the AIGA National Board, and is currently an advisor for the Northwest Arkansas chapter. As a mother, Marty aims to be a mentor and a supporter for other new moms navigating academia. Marty is passionate about community building and improving access to opportunities in Arkansas, and is proud to serve on the board of directors of Thrive in Helena, Arkansas. Welcome, Marty.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Let me just share my screen. All right, everybody see that okay?
Looking good.
Marty.
Great. So I'm Marty Maxwell Lane. I'm an educator, speculator. Hold on just a second. Let me close these windows. There we go. Maker, writer, citizen designer, administrator, and mom. I'm coming to you from a windy and cloudy Northwest Arkansas this morning, which is the traditional and unceded lands of the Osage, Caddo, and Quapaw people. I think design, civic engagement go hand in hand. Just a second, my slides are not advancing. There we go. Sorry, y'all. I think design and civic engagement go hand in hand. I respect curious, kind, empathetic designers. I like collaboration, what ifs, reciprocity, and radical joy. I reject perfection, competition, and hustle culture. I believe humility, empathy, and systems thinking are key to good leadership. This is the lens by which I will talk today. I work in a variety of spaces and ways. A common thread is that I'm passionate about collaboration and community building. You'll see this in my recent co-authored book that Jacob mentioned, Collaboration in Design Education, the way I lead projects in my classroom, my design practice that aims to increase civic engagement and support women running for political office, my engagement on boards such as AIJ and Thrive. Through all of these roles, I'm intentional in being focused on community building. So now that you know just a tiny bit about me, I'd like to talk about how we can work together to cultivate a truly human-centered community in design studios, both in the classroom and in practice. The events of 2020 forced design educators to abruptly change, from the way we teach our classes to the role we play in our students' lives. The events also forced us to reckon with many problems that had existed in design education and practice, yet have gone largely overlooked, such as inequities in the student and employee experience, access to tools and technology, and culturally sensitive mentorship, access to support, and the impact on mental health and well-being. Looking through the lens of human-centered design, I'm interested in exploring how design education and practice must change to better support students and design teams as whole people. Human-centered design meets people where they're at, takes into consideration their pain points, their limitations, their unique needs. It fosters agency and collaboration. It employs empathy and reduced hierarchy to create positive outcomes for the user. So, as design leaders, are we practicing what we preach, or do we perpetuate a one-size-fits-all experience that centers dominant narratives and marginalize others? One of the core tenets of a good collaborative practice that embraces horizontality is sharing space and acknowledging others front and center and not in a footnote. In 2020, my colleague Allie Place organized a panel for AIGA Shift Virtual Summit and asked me to participate. That's a screen grab on the right of the YouTube live stream. It's a little meta YouTube. So we were on there with 5 other designers and educators. The panelists came from a wide variety of higher education institutions, including Hispanic serving institutions, historically black colleges and universities, community colleges, private institutions, and Research One universities. The aim of our conversation was to explore the ways in which design education can and must shift in order to serve the student as a whole person. The discussion with Allie Place, Kareen Kali, Jen White Johnson, Zachary Vernon, Victoria Shepard, and Jason Wilkins was framed through the lens of human-centered design. This is an approach many of us know well. It's an approach to design research that we often teach in our classrooms and utilize in practice. A year later, the line of inquiry is now evolved, and I'm working with the team on the left, Allie Place, Rebecca Tegmeyer, and Gabby Hernandez to further reflect, and we're exploring the idea of turning some of these ideas into a book. I also want to acknowledge there's a great historical and contemporary landscape of knowledge that supports the work of reimagining what our studios might look like. Teaching Community, A Pedagogy of Hope by Bell Hooks, Dory Tunstall's well-known work on respectful design, Proposals for the Feminist Economy by Jennifer Armbrust, just to name a few, are deeply inspiring, important, and transferable to these conversations. What the pandemic revealed to us as a society was how precarious so many people's lives have been, teetering on the edge of financial, social, and emotional collapse for so long that one calamitous event set millions of lives into crisis. Our students were no exception. They lost jobs, they lost loved ones, they lost housing, lost access to social support, lost access to tools like computer labs. They took on new caregiving duties, encountered new mental health challenges, or existing ones were amplified by increased stress and anxiety. I believe we've all faced these unreasonable challenges, and we've had to continue on going to work and to school and leading our lives. Many designers pride themselves or feel pressured to pride themselves on hustle culture, pride themselves on working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Recently, a colleague working in a prominent ad agency told me a story of a coworker who consistently pulls all-nighters and takes sleep breaks at the office under their desks throughout the night. I know of women having no other option than to have to come back to work immediately after childbirth. In design school, there's a long history of brutal all-nighters and unrealistic expectations for perfection and speed. I'd say this is largely an American problem, but designers are ripe to fall into the traps of the constant grind. But today, I want to emphasize and normalize 2 plain facts. First, that designers, students, are whole beings. We are more than our studies and more than our work. Second, design professors and leaders are not experts in all things, and that's okay. We need to allow space for imperfection and knowledge, and acknowledge that a little humility can go a long way. By framing our approach to teaching and leadership around these small revelations, a model emerges that engenders a culture of curiosity and care. So how did we get here? A lot of our ways of working in design are holdovers from Europe. During the Second World War, many designers immigrated to the US and brought with them a history of design pedagogy that was rooted in craft guilds dating back to the 11th century. We know from all of the critical and important work around decolonizing design that there are many ways of thinking about design history that expand the canon beyond this Eurocentric view, and that there is much to learn from an expanded worldview. However, for the most part, our contemporary ways of approaching design are tightly tied to this Eurocentric history. 18th century apprenticeship and workshop models operated for the purpose of apprentices to learn the skills necessary from a master for employment as a craftsman. They were extremely hierarchical in structure and evolved the practice of copying and redrawing artifacts as a way of learning the craft. The expectations for moving up in the ranks were extraordinarily high. The apprenticeships were typically only for men who could pay to receive training. In her book, Teaching Design, Meredith Davis states, the craft guilds established the first organized system of design education and had lasting impact on design practices, how designers prepare for professional work, and definitions of craft. The apprenticeship system of guilds shaped later educational models and defined hiring practices in the design office well into the 20th century. We see this directly in things like recent graduates starting off as production artists or designers. My first job many moons ago was a production artist setting type. Junior designers being valued for how much they can produce versus allowing time for curiosity and for new ideas that may be unusual. We also see the lineages of this model of unpaid labor and many internships today. In some cases, students actually have to pay to intern because they pay for the college credit for the course, and then they are unpaid in their internships. We also see this in the power dynamic of the master and apprentice, and it manifests in education and practice, where designers are to work in the style of the faculty, or in some cases, the team lead. This way of working, or the "this is how it's done here" attitude, makes it very hard for the culture to shift or for young folks to have a voice. Many historians tie the emergence of capitalism directly to the guilds in Europe, so it's also important to look at how many of our ingrained practices and design are rooted in capitalism. These diagrams are from the text I mentioned earlier, Proposals for the Feminist Economy. So looking at the diagram on the left, Armpost compares American capitalism to the idea of a masculine economy. How many of these do we think are attributes that we see commonly in design practice, or that manifest in what people perceive as a good designer? I've highlighted a few that immediately resonate with me that I see in design. Individualism, competition, speed and efficiency, non-accountability, hierarchy, inequitable distribution of wealth, ownership, materialism, profit worship, ego, consumption, etc. In her book, Armhurst asks, if capitalism is an economy that values masculine traits, what could another economy look like? And she proposes the values on the right. If we shifted our core values in design to be more aligned with what is on the right, things like generosity, asking questions, care, empathy, and abundance consciousness could be at the center of our design practice. Just imagine what we could rebuild. So this, I'm wondering if somebody from the AIGA volunteer crew could put this URL in the Slack channel. That would be great. Also, people can screen grab this, but this is a working manifesto that we invite everybody to participate in. It's a Miro board, and we hope everyone will collaborate. This manifesto is intended to prompt a reimagining of the teacher's role and re-envisioning of what the design classroom centered around the notion of the students and educators' humanity as assets, not liabilities. The manifesto is for all designers who are exhausted by the status quo, who reject the capitalist interests in the design discipline, who reject the over-policing of students in the classroom, who believe that higher education can serve students better, and are committed to changing the ways things have always been done. After several conversations that I've had with friends and colleagues working full-time in practice, I wanted to open up this conversation to expand beyond academia and also be inclusive of practice. So now you'll see there's two Miro boards, one for the academic space and a new one dedicated to professional practice. First, we will prioritize access. We acknowledge there are many barriers to success that students may face in design education, including technical, financial, and cultural. We commit to designing courses and programs that address and mitigate these barriers by ensuring students have access to tools, support, and mentorship they need in order to succeed. We commit to cultivating an equitable learning experience for all students and to directly addressing inequities faced by vulnerable students. We reject allegiance to industry standard software and instead commit to promoting acts of making that are more accessible, and software and tool agnostic. We commit to promoting a culture in design education that values the diversity of access points, particularly by acknowledging their paths to design career outside of a standard 4-year program. We commit to working to bring awareness to the career potential of design to K-12 students, because for many, knowing that a stable career is available to them after school is what matters most for their families. So in our 4-year program at the University of Arkansas, this has meant not just reconsidering the cost of the tools we use, but also the myriad of barriers to success. Our School of Art does not require a portfolio review to enter the Foundations program. We offer substantial and reoccurring scholarships. After a year of developing a body of work in the Foundations program, the students then apply to the design program. And if they do not get accepted, they're advised on other programs that may be a good fit for them that will allow them to use those credits in that first year. We are using more open access tools like Miro and Figma when possible. We also realize that access alone is not enough. And in order for students to succeed, we need to offer consistent and culturally appropriate mentoring to first-generation students and any students coming from typically underserved or underrepresented backgrounds. Next, we will foster agency. We commit to facilitating a classroom environment in which students are agents of their own experiences, outcomes, and assessments. We acknowledge that students have to offer as designers is valuable, not in spite of, but because of who they are outside of the classroom. We will value the knowledge that students bring to their education, including their cultural and life experiences. We will provide opportunities for them to apply their knowledge to design. We reject the notion of what the design discipline has traditionally guarded as good design. Instead, cultivate a student's ability to think critically through the lens of their own perspective and worldview. We'll give students the opportunity to participate in their own assessment and take ownership of their contributions to the classroom. We commit to making space for students to collectively develop their own studio community and culture that authentically represents them as a group. We will employ and model empathy. We will employ empathy as a teaching tool and will model empathetic leadership. We commit to creating course structures and program policies that do not seek to punish or disparage vulnerable students. We reject discriminatory practices that further harm marginalized students, such as inflexible attendance policies, in favor of inclusive practices such as engagement policies. We commit to accommodating all learners through our course material and tools, understanding that designing courses for the most vulnerable students will improve the experiences for everyone. We acknowledge that a vulnerability encapsulates a dynamic set of experiences and circumstances, and that vulnerabilities can be superpowers. We commit to fostering an environment where students can show up fully as themselves and be successful. COVID made it impossible to ignore the need for less policing in classrooms, meaning less policing of behaviors, less policing of learning, less policing of bodies, which disproportionately harms designers who experience health challenges, financial instability, or have caregiving duties. Many of us at the U of A here have dropped our attendance policies entirely and instead have engagement policies, which allows for multiple ways of participating, such as verbal, written, synchronous, and asynchronous, and does not contain any threats of punitive measures. Students who miss class or aren't participating as much get a message from one of the faculty and a conversation about how they're doing. We also balance this with clear and fair expectations of workload. We know some agencies offer what's called unlimited paid time off, but at the same time ask employees to produce unrealistic amounts of work product. So it's about doing both. You have to model healthy ways of working. What we want our students to know is that perfection is not required for success. We anticipate mistakes, failures, unforeseen crises, and we design our courses to accommodate those rather than force a student to fall behind. We will interrogate and dismantle traditional hierarchies. We reject the master and apprentice teaching model and the very problematic language. We embrace a reduced hierarchy in the classroom that empowers and cultivates the student's own experiences, skills, interests, and abilities. We embrace our role as professors, serving as co-explorers, co-collaborators, and co-conspirators with our students. We work to build honesty and to build trust. We commit to building relationships with our students based on collaboration and mutual accountability. We recognize that it's our responsibility as people in positions of power to call out and dismantle inequitable power structures in education. As leaders, we must let go of the idea that we are experts. We should embrace curiosity and that we have as much to learn from junior designers and students as they have to learn from us. I always say that I never want to be the smartest person in the room. To me, there's just nothing more boring than that. We will promote a culture of care. We reject the pervasive hustle culture or culture of suffering in design. We embrace a culture built on reciprocity and collaboration. We commit to fostering trust in our relationships with students so they feel comfortable communicating with us about their needs. We commit to fostering safe spaces where students feel seen, heard, and valued. We reject the notion of toxic individuality in designers and instead recognize the studio environment as a community that thrives on shared accountability and collaborative success. We commit to seeking and celebrating joy and curiosity in our studios. Our program aims to create a culture of care by putting students' needs as humans first. One thing we learned over the past year during the pandemic is that the only classroom we want to be a part of is one where everyone is encouraged to embrace their shared humanity. During COVID, that meant babies popping up on Zoom and sharing lots of feelings. That vulnerability is something we've seen continue this fall, with students openly expressing how they are feeling about being back in the classroom during COVID. You can maintain professional boundaries with students and coworkers while also making space for vulnerability. It's work to maintain this openness. It doesn't just happen. We want students to know that they can be valuable contributors and collaborators without hiding who they are in order to conform. During these continuing challenging times, we cannot undervalue the role that joy plays in the classroom. Seeking out and cultivating joy is a small but powerful act of resistance in the oppressive structures. We will hold space for what we do not know and what others have always known. There's an old adage, the teacher who has nothing left to learn has nothing left to teach. We reject the notion of the professor as perfect and embrace a continuous mindset of lifelong learning. We'll hold space for students to be centered as the experts in their own experiences, cultures, and narratives, while decentering ourselves as instructors. We'll model traits such as curiosity and humility as designers and as citizens. We commit to broadening the canon of design by centering voices of marginalized people whose knowledge and skills have been lost, denigrated, or devalued for so long. We embrace alternative forms of knowing, making, and doing. The field of design is constantly evolving and shifting, so our curriculum must also be agile and responsive. We approach our curriculum as a living, breathing organism that can and should change every year. We do not have to teach the way that we were taught, and we should question ourselves if that's our approach. We will care for ourselves so that we may care for others. We recognize that we are better educators and designers when we not only give, but receive. COVID didn't just reveal the precarity of our students, it also revealed the precarity of our colleagues, especially parents, caregivers, faculty of color, and those who struggle with mental health challenges. We must commit to advocating for ourselves and for making our needs known. We'll establish healthy boundaries with our students and our work. We'll model self-respect and healthy working behaviors for our students and our colleagues. We embrace a culture in which designers support each other and reject the culture of zero-sum competition. We insist that there is liberation in cultivating a shared success. Being human-centered in our approach to pedagogy and design requires us to acknowledge that we as educators and leaders are humans too. We need to advocate for better policies for parental leave, better support and mentoring for women, LGBTQ+ folks, faculty of color, and better support for mental health resources overall. We began this line of inquiry during the pandemic in a moment of desperation for ourselves as designers and educators, but also for our students. We reflect that these changes were necessary all along and must be considered for the healthy future of our discipline. We acknowledge the responsibility that we have as educators and leaders to re-examine our role in these problematic systems and commit to pushing our discipline towards a more just, empathetic, and inclusive model. We hope that by adopting a human-centered and heart-forward approach to design, students will not only be more successful in our programs, but they will also leave college more empathetic, more confident, and more prepared for the changing world they encounter. We hope that those of you who are leaders in academia or in practice or both will help us continue to reimagine a new future. This work will take time, it will take commitment, it will take humility, and at the core, it will take community. I just wanted to end with the last slide of the Miro board and invite everybody to contribute. This is ongoing, not just for today, but thank you all so much for being here this morning. And that's it.
Really great job, Marty. Thanks so much. We'd like to go ahead and open it up for question and answers, guys. So if you'd like to drop anything in the YouTube chat or the Slack chat, if you have any questions, then we'll get those to Marty and have those answered. So we haven't had anything come in just yet, but I do have one question for you, Marty. As far as when the pandemic hit, did you all have to try to convert to completely remote learning?
Yeah, we did. I think we had a week to totally transition. It was in the middle of a semester and had to change everything and go completely online, which I think was really common across the country. But yeah, that was a challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's a little early for people to have questions, so I'm not so surprised.
We can give them a couple more, like another minute or so, and then we can probably wrap up. Oh wait.
Looks like we just got one.
Yep, we just got one from Leslie. She says, while we have agency in the classroom, how do design professionals re-educate clients to migrate away from that hustle and that unrealistic deadline mentality?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, you know, I have the benefit of being a freelancer in my practice. So I'm not running an agency. So I'm not beholden to same standards as maybe some people are in that situation. I think my response would be that this is a long game. And the way I approach it with my work within this large university system is just setting boundaries more for myself. They're not necessarily visible for a lot of people, but making sure that I'm not working after hours and on weekends, and people learn to expect the pace at which I work, and just being transparent with what I can deliver and when.
All right, so we've got another one coming from Veronica Riviera. How can design agencies use some of these practices in their work?
That's a great question. And that is what I want to work with people to brainstorm and collaborate on in the Miro space. I am curious of how we do this. One thing I'll say is I spend a lot of time talking to junior designers and women in practice, and I think there is opportunity for everybody to contribute to changing some of these things. You know, the person that I mentioned that was sleeping under their desk, they were in a very high level position. And so they're modeling poor working behaviors for other people. So I would ask people to think about that. I would also think about how we can all mentor people that are new to teams, new to agencies, new to different institutions. What can we offer them as peer mentors to help people navigate these spaces? I think there's little incremental changes that we can all make to contribute.
All right, it looks like we got another one coming from Peter. Can you offer strategies to implement some of your strategies and design programs?
Yeah. So like I said, one thing that we're doing is that comes to mind right away. It's about, you know, attendance and thinking of things. How do you encourage student engagement in ways that is not punitive? So we know that attendance policies are really difficult for people that have illnesses or are caregivers. And so something that we've done is change that to engagement policy and maintaining. The key to that is that you have to have an open channel of communication with students. So we communicate with our students via Slack versus email so that we can have a more kind of casual communication space for them to tell us. The thing I ask students is if you're going to miss a class, I ask you to tell me in advance and to stay in communication with me. And so far it's working. So that's one small thing I would say. Yeah.
All right, so we've got another one coming from Ali B. What are some examples of ways that you reject perfection and embrace imperfection?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me as an educator, that is meant, you know, I came from a long lineage of people that studied in Switzerland, and I was very into typography as a student and a junior designer, and I still am. But I think that as an educator, I can choose how much I want to focus on the perfection of craft or the perfection of things versus ideas. And I'm not saying that you don't do both, that you can still talk about the level of craft or, you know, making sure that things are kerned exactly right and all of those things. But I think it's also about acknowledging that there's a lot of ideas generated from students that don't have to be bound by this idea of perfection. And I think it can be about rotating critiques and what you focus on. But I think there's been too much pressure on design students for this idea of perfection and delivering that all the time. And I don't think that creates the conditions for an open learning space where new ideas are fostered.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, we've got another one coming from Amber. What can be done to prepare students to work and communicate with and lead cross-functional teams, i.e. working with non-designers and learning to advocate for the design discipline?
That's a great question. I think a great way to do this is through collaborative projects in school that are interdisciplinary, that are across campus, that ask students to practice working with those people outside of the design discipline, to learn how to have a shared language with these people. How do you speak to engineers about design? I think practicing that in academia is a great way to do that. And not to like plug my own book and be tacky, but in the book, there are a collection of case studies that I think I don't remember how many we ended up having, but it's just full of different projects of those different types of collaborative models.
All right, just giving it a second to see if anybody
Yeah.
else has any additional questions. All right, looks like we do have one from Sarah. What does it look like for you personally to promote professional boundaries and vulnerability simultaneously in your practice?
Yeah, that's good. So for me, I'm an administrator. So I oversee, it's 60 faculty and 500 students now. And it takes time. You have to, as far as the vulnerability piece, I'm talking now, you have to earn trust with people. And for me, that's been the way that I lead meetings, being open about challenges that I'm facing. I have 2 kids that I still think of them as young. They're a little over now, but just being honest about how things are hard right now and talking through that. And I have one-on-one conversations where I share that I think going to therapy is a great idea and everybody should go, and I go. And then as far as the boundaries, I again state openly in faculty meetings that we should not be emailing after 5 unless it's absolutely urgent, and to really think about what is urgent. And the same thing for the weekend. One strategy that I told people is, because a lot of people do work on the weekend. And I said, if you're going to be working on the weekend and trying to get through your email, just save it as a draft. Because if you send it, getting it off your plate, it then shifts it to somebody else's plate, and then it's on their Sunday plate. So just save it. So I try to just model those behaviors and talk about them openly, and also set aside time to have conversations with people about life. It's not just about our deadlines and the work that we have to produce.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, we've got another one coming through. When comparing the masculine versus feminine economy by Jennifer Armbruce, is it about the approach and not so much about the traditional idea of male versus female? If so, how do we get away from such a binary division?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and one we should probably ask the author of the book and not me. Yeah, for me, it's about the, traditionally the way we think about those ideas and not the binary. Absolutely.
Okay, we've got another one coming in. How do you communicate to your clients that these are your priorities when they seem to be pushing for those more masculine principles / demanding more of a hustle mentality?
So I think, again, I would just want to acknowledge that I'm unique, and that my design practice makes up a small portion of what I do. I am not full-time design practitioner, because I'm also an educator and all of these things. So the clients that I work with at this point in my career, they come to me because of who I am. And they know my way of working. And that's taken time. I remember when I started out as a freelancer, and it was just like I was supposed to be available all of the time. And when I was just starting out, I had a real fear of not meeting those expectations, but I knew it wasn't sustainable. So I think for me, it's just gotten to a point of being consistent. People know that I will deliver and they can trust me, but I've had to build that reputation, I guess, to be able to have those boundaries.
Yeah, I think so much of us probably experience that in our, agency or corporate positions as well, just trying to build like a certain level of rapport with our employer and our teams.
That's why I think I'm really calling out to the leaders here and asking people to really think about designers and people on the team as whole people, and that we all have things that we have to do outside of work and that we want to do, not just have to do, but we have lives. And so how do we accommodate that and make these jobs more sustainable and long-term?
All right, we're going to switch it to a little bit more of a lighthearted question. Hi, Marty. As an educator, what's your tip on networking as a virtual student?
Oh, so in a virtual space, how to network is the question.
I think so, yeah.
Well, I hate to say it because I just took an Instagram break for mental health for 10 days, but Instagram is great. I think following accounts, communicating with designers and educators, in my experience, people are really open on Instagram. Also, AIJ has set up a really great community, I think, on Slack. There's lots of different channels and spaces for engaging. So I would just get out there. And I think as a student, the thing to remember is that everybody wants to help a student. So take advantage of it while you can. Lead with the fact that you're a student, and ask people for conversation.
All right, we've got one coming from one of our board presidents from the AIGA NWA chapter, Courtney. For those of us who grew up attributing our own self-worth to what we produce and building bad habits around competition and hustle culture, what tips do you have for beginning to break those habits?
I can speak from experience here. I really think it's about building a mentor group first. So building a network with people who are also interested in shifting these ideas and how we value ourselves, and talking openly with those people. I think that it can be really great to have, I'm just a huge fan of peer mentors, friend mentors, people that, I think of it kind of like a workout buddy. They hold you accountable for the things that you're wanting to accomplish. They remind you of your value and your worth. And I think just being there for each other to navigate those things in the beginning is really good. And I also, one thing is that the work is just never going to be all done. It's just never going to be all done. So we just do what we can in the day. And then I think it's really important to just set it aside. We prioritize, we do what's most important, and the rest will be there the next day. But I think having a peer group is really, really important. Courtney, I'm here for you.
She just called me out for blowing her cover, so it's my bad.
Okay, it's about vulnerability and being open, right?
All right, Marty, I think as we maybe wait for any last minute questions to come through. Okay, wait, we've got one right now. All right. Is there a reading list that could be shared from Marty's talk this morning? She shared a slide, but titles are not clear to read. Okay, yeah. So is that something we maybe could follow up with you on?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy
Great.
to do that.
Well, we will follow up on a reading list from Marty. And then we've got one from Allie Place. Marty, what's the hardest thing that you've had to unlearn / are still unlearning?
Say that again. Sorry, I was writing down reading list.
Marty, what is the hardest thing you've had to unlearn / are still unlearning?
I think for me as an administrator, the idea that I need to respond to everybody right away for them to know that I care. And I am constantly working on that, and figuring out how to build trust and demonstrate care without being available to everyone all of the time, because I need to be available for me too.
Yeah, it's a really great point, and something that I've encountered in my professional experience as well, is just this like urgency to respond and be on top of everything all the time.
Yeah.
Instead of taking a second to pause and have a break. All righty. Okay. All right. I'd like to give you an opportunity just to add any closing thoughts, Marty, before we do our outro, and see if any questions come through.
I just want to say there were a lot of great questions about practice specifically. And so I really am interested in what ideas people have. And so I would love it if people contributed to the Miro board, the ideas that we are collectively building these ideas. So I just encourage people to do that because I'd love their input.
That's great. All righty. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we leave, I want to give another shout out to our sponsors this year for Midwest Design Week. Again, any updates on event information throughout the week can be found on Slack. So please do sign up on our Slack and connect with your fellow creatives. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us on Slack via the hashtag Midwest Design Week support channel, or direct message anyone from the organizing team, and we can help you. With whatever you may need. I'd like to give just a digital round of applause to Marty. Thanks so much for all the thoughts and insights. I found them very helpful, and I'm sure everybody else did as well. I've got one other quick one, Marty, if you don't mind. Just came in. How can you try to encourage a nurturing environment for growth and mentorship in your workplace from a junior designer's position when it's clear that hustle culture is valued more?
I think that's a really good question. And I don't want to respond in the same way exactly, but I would say I would look for allies. I would look for other junior designers that are in the same space. I would look for people in leadership who you think may have some affinities to your ideas. Talk with them, brainstorm with them, try to get the conversations going. I think look for small things that can shift. One of my mottos recently has just been inch by inch. So I would say that. I would also not lose hope and really think about how we can all work to collectively change things for the future through these small incremental changes through relationships. But yeah, seeking allies would be my number one thought for a junior designer.
And that is a great thought to end on. Thanks so much for your time, everybody. And I hope you enjoy the rest of our Midwest Design Week events going on, and look forward to seeing you there for them. So have a great rest of the day, guys.
Thanks, y'all.